Hello and welcome to the Madecast, the official podcast of the Museum of Art and Digital Entertainment, a series of lectures on video game history as part of the Made's ongoing effort to preserve history through teaching and displaying playable exhibits of rare games and consoles.
While life in the time of COVID has forced us to close our doors, the support of people like you has allowed us to continue to bring history to you through lectures and interviews like the one you will hear in a few minutes. I'm Chin.
I'm Red.
And I'm Miles. This week, Alex chats with Keith Nemitz, seasoned game developer and programmer, and they talk about his entry into game development over the years and his work on games for Macs in particular.
Another fascinating entry hearing about some old days in the Sierra world, porting games over to Macs, so it'll be a very interesting conversation. But before we do that, let's get into some news. So Nintendo Online recently added N64 games to the Switch, but they've been not the best release.
It's a bit shaky.
Just a little bit. I mean, everything that can go wrong in some way has gone wrong at least a little bit. Input lag, frame rate, button mapping not being optimized for Switch in any way.
Low-res textures, bad draw distances, fog, no fog. I saw a comparison of original Ocarina of Time versus Ocarina of Time on the Wii U's emulator versus Ocarina of Time on the Switch's emulator, and it's kind of sad, honestly.
I'm actually surprised about Nintendo will mess it up for this time. I mean, they used to doing pretty good, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would have thought that, I mean, for everything else that they released, you would have thought they would be focused a little bit more on polish. But
hopefully it'll get there.
Yes, hopefully it'll get there. It just seems that that's it's been the way for a lot of just different games coming out. You need to wait a couple months for updates to fix what should have been fixed at launch. But it happens, and it's going to keep happening. In other news, Pikmin turns 20, and they've been celebrating with a mobile game release. I believe the beta is out now, called Pikmin Bloom. I'm not too familiar with how it works out, but it's another mobile game to operates like a Pikmin version of Pokemon Go.
I always feel like the Pikmin series is very underrated by the people, maybe because of the appearance, or people just never give it a try. But when you try to play it, it's actually very fun.
I love Pikmin.
Yeah.
I played the original one nonstop for a long time. It was one of the most super extremely peaceful and just a very fun puzzle game involving little cute coochies and a rocket ship. So
Pikmin 1 came out on the Nintendo GameCube October 26th, 2001, 20 years ago.
20 years ago. It's almost as old as me.
Oh my God. Yeah, I know. Oh my God. Yeah, I can't believe that it's been that long. I even remember the house I played that game in. Wow. Pikmin, I'm excited to see what it's going to be about. I'm probably going to give that a shot. Maybe we can talk a little bit later about that next week. But as far as other things served, Terraria and Don't Starve are having a crossover.
So originally, Terraria was released in 2011.
God.
And it has been updated and added to ever since. And I believe very recently the developer said, hey, we're done. The game is finished. There's no more. And then a couple days ago, they put a little announcement out that was like, hey, we're doing a thing. And there was a little GIF of Don't Starve, and it had the Eye of Cthulhu, one of the first bosses in Terraria. So we're looking at potentially more content.
In other little news, a New World server has become a casino, kind of in response to a post end game of New World. You can go in and check out this other specific server where you enter a trade and you use the dice emoji or die emoji to basically you offer something up and then you both put up the die emoji with whoever you're trying to trade with. Whoever wins that just gets the trade flat out. So a gambling server, if you will, for any good items in game. So head over there and check that one out. Alrighty, well, I think that is all for the news right now, and then we will throw it over to Alex and Keith. So without further ado, here is their conversation.
And we're back with Keith Nemitz. How you doing, Keith?
Oh, quite well. How are you, Alex?
Good. Haven't seen you since last we played D&D, really. So it's good to see you again.
Yeah, we need to take care of that awful NPC that you developed long ago.
Yes, Earache is tormenting us. I should tell the story of him someday because he is inspired by a good friend of mine who passed on, who would be furious that I made a bard after him. Absolutely furious that I named a bard after him. He would have preferred a necromancer. So, Keith, why you're a very experienced game developer. I mean, you've been programming for years. I mean, why don't you tell us how you got started programming?
That would have been in high school. A friend of mine was talking about his little programming in BASIC using the school district's DEC 10 mainframe. We had a 300 baud teletype terminal, and later we got, I think it was a 1200 baud terminal, video terminal. So we really were like just cruising at that time.
That was at school, this device.
Yeah, that was high school. It was my junior year, I think.
Were you like sneaking in to find time on the machine, or did you have scheduled time? Or
They had classes, and once I found out that he had taken the first semester class, I talked to the teacher, and he let me take the second semester class, which was Fortran. So I actually started learning Fortran first.
Wow, that's actually like a useful language to this day.
It is scary, but it has to do with like, what is Fortran today? Will it run old Fortran code? I'm a little suspicious about that.
Certainly. But, old code never goes away when it's used in a business.
Oh, man. Talk about those poor COBOL programmers.
Yeah, right. They get compensated for it these days, I hear.
Yeah, they do. And they also made bank during 2000 to fix all those into the millennium bugs.
Exactly. So how did you end up working as a programmer?
Well, I got my degree in computer science engineering, and I was hired by Boeing coming out of college. So I was doing some work in their workstations group, where they were the only group in all of Boeing that could sneak Macintoshes into the company because they had a workstation license and they could sell them as workstation machines.
And what were they using those for? To design aircraft and things, or
no? They put them on the desks of every person. They had the original. I think they were 512 Macs. And I remember a specific moment where the office assistant, she says, "I don't want a computer. I don't want a computer. They're all big, bulky things." And she set it down on the desk. Says, "Oh my God, it's just a baby." And it was adorable to her after that. And that really helped her like overcome there's still a learning curve, right? But she really was very pleased by this.
It shows how far a little personality can go.
Yeah.
So how did you come to work at Apple?
Well, I left Boeing and started working for APPLE Co-op, which was a user group for the Apple II. And they saw declining numbers because the Apple II was fading. And they tried to get into this Macintosh thing. And they did some stuff with APTA, which was the original Apple developers kind of like initiative, trying to bring Macintosh documentation to developers in a cogent way. And that wasn't my in, unfortunately. I just saw an ad in a newspaper saying like, "Work for Apple," or something like that. And I got a phone interview, and they brought me down, and we did the full interview at Apple, and I started working on testing MaxBug, which was the low-level debugger for the 68K on those machines.
And now to test that, you had to like trigger into MaxBugs. I mean, that was like when things went wrong, you could dump into MaxBugs and see what was going on, see what was right in memory, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was the perfect hacking tool if you really like playing with bits and bytes.
But how did you have like a tool that could trigger it to just bring it up whenever you wanted?
Oh, that's easy. All you have to do is just cause some kind of typical error. And basically we were running scripts and we were running some code to trigger it. But a lot of you could also do fairly complex instructions into MaxBug command line. Mm-hmm. So you were doing lots of different tests. You could inject a command line test to it. I'm not sure all the details anymore.
I mean, you say scripts there. What does it mean to script on a Macintosh in 1980s? I don't even remember AppleScript existing until the early mid 90s.
No. There was the iBasic.
iBasic. There you go. So you're actually writing these tests at BASIC.
Sure, but we could also write it in C and such. It wasn't really hard. I mean, most of your work was going to put a lot of text strings that were going to send commands to MaxBug.
So it really was scripting, yeah. So then you came to work on the ResEdit team, right?
That's right.
Now, ResEdit was a favorite tool of mine. Anybody out there who's a Mac nerd loved ResEdit. What was it like working? That was the only sort of development tool that I remember for the Mac that really had a personality to it. I mean, it feels like it was a fun tool to build.
Oh, it was, because you could basically dive into any of the resources of any application and change them up, take them out, reuse them. It was a terrific tool. And as Mac apps became more reliant on resources, it became a better tool. And gosh, that kept being the top tool to play around with for a long time. Some developers would start encoding data into black box resources if they needed to hide stuff. But whatever.
I remember fishing around in programs, playing redoing After Dark screensavers with it. I remember pulling images out of games like Chuck Yeager's Air Combat because I didn't have any clip art, so I was using the pictures of pilots and things like that. I mean, an incredibly useful tool that really opened up the Mac to me as a nerd with not a lot of resources or things to play with at the time.
Yeah, it was like your local internet.
It was. So eventually you moved on to games.
That's right. I was working at Apple, and I went to I think it was the second or third Game Developers Conference.
Wearing the associate shirt from 2018.
Yeah, and that was happening in Milpitas at a Holiday Inn. Really enjoyed the experience. Some of the details are a little blurry, but I may have gone there and enjoyed the experience the first time. And then the second time I brought a tool that I wanted to think it was a tool for role-playing game masters, where you could create your world, create the system that you wanted. You could define all this stuff, and you could run the game from the Macintosh. And I remember some of the people at EA, it was Richard Hilleman, saying that, well, this is pretty great, except nobody has computers to run during thing, and laptops really weren't a thing at all at that point. So I was kind of ahead of the game on that design. But, I was a game referee. I wanted that tool,
And you moved on to actually designing games from there, right?
Well, that wasn't my in. It was I think the following year I went again, and we were just talking at one of the parties, and the guy comes up and says, "Oh, you do Macintosh work?" Yeah, I've been working on Apple a while. And he says, would you like a job? And that was Stuart Mulder out of Sierra Online.
Oh.
Yep. And so I worked at Sierra.
What they have you doing?
I was doing all the Macintosh ports from 91 to 92 to 93 or 4.
93 or 4. God, okay. Now you're really testing my memory because I'm trying to think of some games in that period there. That'd probably be like King's Quest 5 or 6.
Yeah, we were cranking out games that were about a year old, actually. And we're trying to catch up with the modern games. But I put out 10 games in, I think, 2 years, or 15 games in 2 years.
Jeez, machine.
Well, it was using the interpreter, right? So most of those games were written in an interpreter. We just had to convert the interpreter over and then fix all the bugs that were in the code, the interpreted code. Because, boy, it's amazing what got through. and we fixed them, but we had our own set of bugs that we had to deal with too. And one was very frightful, which I never caught until the very end of, I think, the Macintosh period when they were porting games. It had to do with the MIDI driver. It was a driver that was compiled for the Amiga. So 68000, right? But It didn't have the right register saves happening. Mm-hmm. And so when the Mac would call it, sometimes one of the registers would have garbage in it after the call. And so it would just do all sorts of horrible things, but tracking it down was a bear.
But you got it before you shipped.
No, we couldn't fix the bug.
Oh, which game is this?
It had to do with the fact that it was a compiled library. And either I would have to rewrite an entire MIDI driver or ship it as is and cross your fingers is basically what happened. I was like, I found the bug. I told them what the solutions were. We couldn't fix it in any reasonable time. So they shipped the game. And I will always be sad about poor Al because it was his game, Freddy Farkas, Frontier Pharmacist, that seemed to cause the bug the most. And I always was sad for poor Al about that.
I played a lot of Freddy Farkas, actually, in my day. Somebody got it in my high school and we passed the discs around.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite Sierra games.
It's a completely forgotten one. And the whole alchemy kind of thing going on there is so...
Yeah.
It's like, you got to really be a pharmacist.
It was also the first game that Josh was really a major contributor to that product. So it really kind of changed a lot of the type of humor that you would experience from a typical Al game.
Yeah. Yeah, it wasn't all just boob jokes with Al.
Yeah, fortunately, it was. Yeah, we could talk about that in a separate interview if you want to talk of Freddy Farkas.
Actually, we should do some kind of deep dive. Maybe we can do a Freddy Farkas reunion because I deeply love that game and the ethos of it. It is just such an out of left field.
Yeah,
like Freddy Farkas, Frontier Pharmacist. For anyone who is unfamiliar with the game,
spelled with a lot of PHs.
Yes, I think that was intentional, right?
Yeah. We actually put an Easter egg on the Mac version because we could.
Oh, really? What is it?
It has to do with there was a demo version of the game, and it used a screen that was not used in the regular game, but you could still access it. So you could go to just a view of a pond, right? And I had this idea of Excalibur, right? And there's like a voice that speaks to you and says would you like a Macintosh? And a hand rises a Macintosh out of the water, and says, "Oh, I see you already have one," and pulls it back down.
That's great. How did you get to 3DO?
Well, that was later. I was like, this is the last of the industry jobs I had. I left Sierra, I think 93, 94. These are always going to be sketchy numbers. To work for Digital Pictures, which was the people that did Sewer Shark and Fright. No, not Fright Night.
What was that like? I mean, that's going from sort of day-to-day porting to absolute insanity with money coming out of a fire hose.
Unfortunately, yeah, so much that I could be saying about that. But I interviewed for the job, and they talked about the different types of products they were making. They were doing genre full motion video games. Okay, and what the technology would be, they would have the video encoded, and then as it was decoding, you would add sprites to it in real time to react to what the player was doing. And I mentioned one of the fun games that they were working on was Shanghai. It was their martial arts film that was made by the Shaw Brothers, actually filmed by a Shaw Brothers company, and just your very classic, straightforward kung fu movie out of China with Chinese actors and Chinese martial arts. And I said, I'd love to work on something like that. And so I ended up working on a football game. I had to ask the area associate, it's like, what's a 2-point conversion? I didn't know football.
You're not a big sports guy.
No.
I know you're like a much bigger board gamer. So I wanted to talk about. I know we've already sort of run through a lot of your past career, but I want to talk about your stuff with Mousechief in your own games because that's I think far more exciting because you design these things. So like Dangerous High School Girls in Trouble, 7 Grand Steps. What are you thinking looking back on? It's almost been 20 years of being an independent game developer.
Almost,
right?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that journey? There's not a lot of people who have the ability to have that much of a career as an indie developer behind them. I'm interested.
Well, I took so long to make games that I didn't make that many as you might, because I was highly resource constrained, and also I have a penchant for doing narrative games, which entail a lot of writing. And I can say for 7 Grand Steps, 2 of those years was just writing. Mm-hmm. The game was working. All I just needed to do is just fill the content. And there was a massive need for content in order to get the experience that I wanted. Because if you played through it once, you'd get to see about roughly a third of the content, and you could play it again, you'd see roughly a half at that point. So there was enough there to make you want to play it a few times, it gave you this sense of like, yeah, my choices are meaningful. The different tracks and the different professions that you choose all kind of like give you little bits of the full content. That's why those games took so long to make. But I'm gonna catch up and say that after Digital Pictures, which the fire hose got shut off rather rudely by Acclaim, they basically said, no, we're not going to fund you anymore, and poof, it was gone. We were all gone the next week. So that was very, very sad. It was one of the best companies I ever worked for. I love the people, the staff. I was treated excellently. I was the one who was burning myself out. They never asked me to come in and do extra hours. I just loved doing it, and I really wanted to get, up there. And that was my lesson to actually learn about burnout.
Yeah.
So after that, I worked for Stormfront Studios, which just was a contract developer for various things. They did some stuff for EA. They did like Pool of Radiance something or other. I can't remember. They also did a couple of their own games, which did okay. They were pretty good games. But then I moved. Then after that, I left for Seattle, and while I was in Seattle, I spent 3 months making my first indie game. And it wasn't a complete game; it was just a demo. But it was Flagship Champion, which was a Starship combat game. That was my first Independent Game Festival nominee. So I was really happy to.
God, that must have been like Indie Games Fest 1 or 2 or 3 there.
It was the first one.
The first one.
1999.
Yeah. There you go.
And I feel so fortunate. I got to meet Andy Schatz because he was also there with his little Africa Safari photograph game. And there's these other game developers that we were in this little area with our little kiosks, right? And nobody else. Nobody knew what an indie game was. Nobody knew why we were there. We just were just hanging out with each other, talking about game development. It was one of the important things that happened to me because it kind of like showed me how important a community was. So we were the first indie game community, really.
It's interesting because that era, you don't see people talk about the games from that era, the indie games from that era. They're just sort of a lost thing. Like even all the way up to Aquaria, even like it's not until maybe 10, 12 years ago that these indie games, the winner starts to be like a big deal and get publishing deals and actually good.
Braid was probably the big breakout where people really started taking attention.
Yeah, but before that, it's just, it's this unknown world. People have this view of the indie game scene or whatever, but you're absolutely right. It's a community. It's just a bunch of people who are extremely resource constrained, helping each other.
Yeah, that was an interesting year. I was also picked for one of my games in that year that Braid shipped. Or I'm not sure if they shipped in the year that they showed. But I was there looking across the ranks of the various kiosks, talking to people, and never once saw the creator of Braid.
Oh, yeah, Jonathan. And
he was constantly in meetings. People somehow he did a fantastic job of getting out the word about, talking about his game. And I guess he was looking for publishing deals. But yeah,
and platforming games are pretty much like the soul of the video game industry in terms of branding and excitement and interest and easy to communicate, right? So
yeah.
But you I don't think you've ever made a jump button in a single one of your games, have you?
A couple demos, but no game.
A couple demos. So okay, we've got a few minutes here left. Why don't we talk about Dangerous High School Girls in Trouble? Like, is that available anywhere? Can I play that right now?
Yeah, it's on Steam.
On Steam. Okay.
So it's 7 Grand Steps.
So
there'll be a few sales this year, so you might want to look for them. In fact, there's a board game sale that's happening on Steam pretty soon. Because technically Dangerous High School Girls in Trouble is a video game version of a board game. That it's always been allowed into that. And also 7 Grand Steps, which has a lot of board game style mechanics in it, is also usually allowed into that that sale. So
yeah, your games are indeed very board game like. But I feel like the mechanics are very, very finely honed, like just perfectly honed as well. Like the thing that I consider to be sort of a hallmark of your game is like it is every single thing I do matters. There's no throwaway actions. There's no time where I'm like, well, I'll try this and see what happens, and there won't be a repercussion for my actions. There's always a repercussion, especially in 7 Grand Steps. Oh my God, that game comes down to there is a correct move here. I gotta find it.
Yeah, there's a lot of subtlety that I wish I could have explained better in the tutorials or the documentation. The big thing is always like keep an eye on what your peers are doing, because if you can take advantage of that, it'll always give you that extra bonus that you need. Yeah,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just you can go and have an interaction with somebody. It's not cheating on your wife in that game. Don't feel ashamed to move forward and run around the person who's not your betrothed. It's okay. Well, excellent. Thank you, Keith, so much for being here. Let's put a pin in that Freddy Farkas thing. Maybe we could get Al and Josh together.
Oh, that would be so great.
That would be awesome. Thank you so much for being here, and can't wait to. Maybe we'll be playing D&D this weekend.
Well, thank you, Alex. It's been a really fun time talking.
And we're back. Thank you very much, Keith, for joining us on this podcast and chatting with Alex for a little bit and letting us pick your brain and your history. So, for the end of this today, we need to hear from you, Miles. You need to let us know about Metroid Dread.
It's finally time.
It's finally time.
So
here's the floor.
I have 100% of the game. It's not a huge undertaking, 200% a Metroid game. It's a lot of just collectibles that are fairly straightforward to find. The biggest part of the game that's actually challenging is the bosses, particularly the final boss, who is a monster. Very fun boss, very, very difficult. The other big thing is the slight spoilers, the Shine Spark puzzles, which is all about conserving movement, storing momentum, and then using it to just burst through a wall that you couldn't normally get through. Overall, it is a hard return to form. It is a solid game.
So is Fusion was the Metroid game that was essentially storyline-wise right before this one?
Yes. I really don't want to get into spoilers for it because there is definite story to it, and
no more spoilers.
But I think the biggest thing about Metroid games in particular is the speedrunning community, which I think is very interesting, and I've started to get into it myself. I've started practicing my run. I beat the game on normal in just under 12 hours.
Okay.
I think 11 hours, 40 minutes or something. The current world record is 1 hour, 25 minutes, 21 seconds.
This is any percent?
Any percent.
So is this like, then you, at that point you would have to like glitch through walls and have those like special range of movement that is not like shown to you in the game. It's
mostly actually just skips. I've watched the run, and there are 1 or 2 glitches that you utilize over and over again, because there's one thing where you can shoot through a wall in several different places by utilizing this one trick. Everything else is the game just is built for speedrunners. It's made so that you can play it out of sequence, so that you can skip bosses, so that you can do things if you know what to do. And I think that is a fascinating kind of game.
That's interesting. I'm going to have to look at that as well. That will be...
And they expect you to speedrun it because all of the gameplay rewards, it's not tied to difficulty. It's not tied to completion percentage. It's tied to time. So to get all the rewards for it, you need to beat the game in under 3 hours.
Okay.
Which is mostly just, art anyway. So it's not a huge deal to not.
I think it's the way to go for this kind of game to survive in these days. Just it's a good way to make players to just keep playing the game instead of just play it once and throw it away.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's some amazing speedrunners that it's almost like a Zen state. Just like a super meditative state when they're doing speed runs of these games. It's just pure focus and they're just all flow. It's some of these pro speedrunners, and I'm sure it's going to be amazing to see the speed run of Dread if they had the video of it.
Mm-hmm.
My reflexes have never been as quick, and I've never been able to execute certain speed running tricks that are needed on some games.
Sometimes I feel like it's more like your practice and muscle memory than the reflex itself.
There's no reactions involved. It's all muscle memory. You just practice it and practice it and practice it until you know what you're doing without thinking about it.
Yeah, practice makes perfect.
Practice making perfect. Well, thank you very much for getting on the Metroid Dread train. We may have to touch a little bit more about it next week, but I think that's about all we have time for today. We want to thank you for listening to the Museum of Art and Digital Entertainment's official podcast. If you have any thoughts, questions, corrections, or general museum ideas, shoot us an email at info@themade.org.
We'd like to send out a big thank you to everyone who donated recently and to our Patreon supporters who keep the Made afloat. Patreon donors get to listen to this podcast 1 week before it's released on major streaming services, and we'll continue that with future episodes every week.
This week's episode was brought to you in part by Patreon donors Dana Northrop and Joseph Morita. Thanks so much for your support. Till then, I'm Chun.
I'm Miles.
I'm Red. Thanks, and we'll see you next week.